In the summer of 1914, Europe stood on the edge of collapse. Only weeks after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the entire continent was drawn into a whirlwind of war from which no nation could escape. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia mobilized, Germany responded by preparing for a full-scale conflict, and Britain and France were pulled in through a chain of binding alliances. In the blink of an eye, the most civilized continent on Earth descended into unprecedented chaos. In this tense atmosphere, Germany, the strongest military power in Europe, made a decision it believed would determine the fate of the war within its opening weeks. Determined to avoid a prolonged two-front conflict against France in the west and Russia in the east, the German General Staff, inheriting the doctrine and structure of Alfred von Schlieffen, finalized what became known as the Schlieffen Plan. A lightning-fast offensive through Belgium, sweeping around France's northern defenses and crushing Paris in a matter of weeks. The plan shocked even those within the German army. To defeat France quickly, Germany would have to invade Belgium, a small but neutral nation protected under international law. Doing so not only violated the Treaty of 1839, but guaranteed that Britain, the guarantor of Belgian neutrality, would enter the war. Yet Berlin believed speed was the key. If German forces could seize the Belgian corridors swiftly, France would collapse before Britain could deploy meaningful manpower to the continent. But standing directly in their path was a thorn, a small but formidable fortress city no one could ignore: Liège. Situated along the Meuse River, Liège was the strategic gateway linking Germany to Belgium's interior and the routes leading into France. In the early 20th century, Belgium constructed one of the most advanced defensive systems in Europe around the city, designed by renowned military engineer Henri-Alexis Brialmont. 12 reinforced concrete forts, equipped with heavy artillery and interconnected overlapping fields of fire, formed a ring of steel around Liège. Each fort supported the others, creating a defensive network Germany could not afford to bypass. If Germany wanted to push its massive First and Second Armies into Belgium, it would have to break the Liège fortress ring. If not, the Schlieffen Plan would stall on its very first day. When war officially erupted on August 1st, 1914, Belgium declared general mobilization. But even before the troops could assemble, reports arrived that German forces were crossing the border. King Albert I, famous for his resolve, ordered the army to defend the nation at any cost. For Belgium, this was not merely a military decision. It was a fight for national survival. General Gerard Lehmann was placed in command of the entire Liège defense system. With only about 32,000 soldiers, mostly reservists and conscripts, he nevertheless vowed to hold the city. Lehmann understood he could not defeat Germany outright, but he could buy time, and time was exactly what the Allies needed. If Belgium held long enough, France and Britain could fully mobilize. On August 4th, Germany issued an ultimatum demanding Belgium open its borders and allow the German army to march through unopposed. Belgium refused without hesitation. That same day, Germany declared war and began its invasion. The columns pouring in from Aachen were so large that the roads were clogged with infantry, cavalry, artillery, and supply wagons. To German commanders, Belgium seemed like a minor obstacle that would crumble within days. But when the First Army under von Kluck and the Second Army under von Bülow reached Liège, they found an enemy far more determined than they expected. Belgian troops along the border fought fiercely, blowing up bridges, tearing up railway lines, and using every tactic possible to slow the German advance. Villages such as Vissé, Argenteau, Erstal ignited into small but brutal skirmishes. Every hour Belgium delayed Germany was a priceless gift to the Allies. As German forces closed in on Liège, they were stunned by the fortress system's strength and by the ferocity of Belgian resistance. Forts like Barchamps, Evigné, Fléron, and Chaudfontaine unleashed devastating artillery fire, shaking the Meuse Valley with thunderous explosions. Germany deployed elite assault troops carrying ropes, explosives, and modern rifles, planning to storm the forts with speed and shock. But the assault collapsed almost immediately. Machine gun fire and fortified bunkers cut down wave after wave of infantry. On the night of August 5th, multiple German units retreated with heavy casualties. Soldiers who had assumed Belgium would crumble quickly now realized they were fighting an enemy defending its very existence. The Germans soon understood that capturing Liège with infantry alone was impossible. The Briomont forts were far too strong to be reduced by conventional weapons. And so, the German High Command was forced to deploy a weapon they had hoped not to reveal so early in the war: the giant super-heavy siege guns, the infamous Big Berthas. Their arrival would completely transform the battle and turn Liège into the terrifying opening bloodbath of World War I. At dawn on August 6, 1914, as the fighting around Liège entered its second day, the Germans finally realized they had underestimated their opponent. The advance battalions, celebrated as some of the finest in the Imperial German Army, had run straight into a storm of Belgian fire they never anticipated. Infantry could not get anywhere near the forts. Light artillery barely scratched the concrete, and Belgian soldiers fought with unshakable resolve. General von Emich, commander of the Liège assault force, reported back to Berlin that taking the fortress ring would take many days and cost far more casualties than expected. That was something the German High Command could not accept. They needed speed, and Liège was slowing the Schlieffen plan by the hour. So they decided to unleash their most terrifying secret weapon: the Big Bertha super heavy siege guns. Big Bertha, a 420mm gun built by Krupp, could fire nearly 1-ton shells capable of pulverizing reinforced concrete. It represented the fusion of cutting-edge engineering and the military ambition of the German Empire. For years, these guns had been kept in strict secrecy, waiting for the moment war broke out. And now, Liège would become the first battlefield to witness their destructive power. On the morning of August 6th, the Big Berthas were brought into position near the eastern forts of Liège. Moving these monsters was an operation in itself. Hundreds of engineers, teams of draft horses, temporary rail tracks, and cranes all worked together just to assemble each gun. The Germans erected camouflage tents to keep the weapons hidden from Belgian scouts. And when everything was ready, they opened fire. The first shot sounded like thunder splitting the earth. Trees shook. The air itself seemed to compress, making German soldiers standing far away feel a sharp pain in their chests. The shell arced into the sky, leaving a streak of white smoke behind it, before slamming into Fort Pontis. A deafening explosion followed, so violent it felt like an earthquake. Massive slabs of concrete collapsed. Steel beams twisted like paper. For the first time in history, a modern fortress was being torn apart by a handful of shells. Pontis took 3 more hits before falling silent. The surviving Belgian garrison abandoned it and withdrew to inner defensive positions. A fortress once considered a symbol of modern engineering had been shredded by Big Bertha in a single morning. Next came Fort Barchan. Belgian engineers had once believed its 4-meter-thick concrete walls could withstand any conventional artillery. But against Big Bertha, they might as well have been sand. Entire bunkers were blasted open. Shells punched through steel-reinforced domes weighing dozens of tons. Several Belgian guns were destroyed right inside their casemates, leaving the defenders almost unable to respond. By sundown, Barchan could no longer fight. Despite the devastation, the Belgians did not give up. The garrisons of Forts Fléron, Evigny, and Chaux-Fontaine continued to hold out. Soldiers fought under constant bombardment, suffering heavy losses but refusing to abandon their posts. Some forts fell silent not because they were destroyed, but because the defenders had to ration ammunition or repair damaged guns. While the German superguns battered the forts, German infantry tightened the encirclement. They had failed to advance on the 4th and 5th, but once Big Bertha opened breaches in the ring, the Germans began probing for weak points. On the night of August 6th, a battalion from the 27th Rifle Brigade under Colonel Bayer was ordered to infiltrate the city of Liège through the outlying villages. They marched silently through forests, slipping past thin Belgian picket lines. By dawn on August 7th, they had reached the outskirts of Liège with surprisingly little resistance, something even the Germans had not expected. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Civilians fled in terror. Artillery from the forts thundered non-stop. Belgian squads pulled back to defend the bridges over the Meuse. When German troops emerged from the darkness, They caught the Belgians off guard, who were focused mainly on the ring of forts. Brief but fierce street fighting erupted, though without reinforcements, the German battalion could seize only a few positions in the city center. Deep underground in his command bunker, General Gerard Lehmann remained steadfast. He ordered every remaining fort to continue resisting, regardless of casualties. For him, the supreme mission was clear: buy as much time as possible for the Allies to mobilize. Germany committed more elite troops to assist the infiltrating battalion. The Second Army under von Bülow was ordered to pierce the fortress ring and take Liège at any cost. But even as Big Bertha continued ripping through the defenses, Belgian resistance was so fierce that the Germans could not fully claim control of the battlefield. By August 7th, although German forces had seized key areas inside the city, they still could not declare victory. The fortress ring around Liège, though battered, still largely stood, and the forts continued firing into German troop concentrations, inflicting significant casualties. The proud Brialmont system now looked like a wasteland, black smoke rising from shattered gun emplacements, cracked walls, twisted iron, and rubble scattered across the ground. Yet within that devastation, the Belgian will to resist still burned brightly. They knew they could not win, but they could slow the advance of an empire racing toward Paris. For Germany, time had become the enemy. Every hour that passed allowed France and Britain to bring more troops to the front. Liège should have fallen in a single day, according to Schlieffen's calculations. And yet 4 days into the battle, the Germans were still struggling against a small but astonishingly determined foe. A German officer later wrote in his memoir, "We were not fighting an army. We were fighting the will of a nation." The brutal days that followed would determine whether Germany could finally crush the Liège fortress ring, and whether the Belgians could hold out just a little longer as Big Bertha roared with ever-increasing fury. On August 7th, 1914, even though German troops had managed to infiltrate the center of Liège, the battle was nowhere near the conclusion they had hoped for. The fortress ring, the heart of Belgium's defensive system, still stood firm at multiple points. General Gerard Lehmann refused to leave his command post, directing every unit with iron determination. The Germans had not expected that. Instead of collapsing under Big Bertha's bombardment, the Belgians would fight even harder, turning Liège into a last stand that astonished all of Europe. The eastern forts, Barchamps, Evigné, and Pontis, had been heavily damaged, but the surviving Belgian defenders established firing positions amid the rubble. In cracked concrete corridors filled with choking dust and gunpowder smoke, they kept shooting, forcing German infantry to crawl forward inch by inch under machine gun fire hidden within the remaining embrasures. The Germans now realized that capturing central Liège did not mean they had destroyed the defensive system. They controlled the city, yet found themselves constantly shelled by the outer forts. Belgian 120mm and 150mm rounds rained down on German assembly areas, smashing newly seized positions. German air reconnaissance was still too limited to spot and silence the forts effectively, turning the task of counter-battery fire into a nightmare. General von Bülow, commander of the German Second Army, understood that the situation was slipping away from the plan. Liège was supposed to fall in 24 hours, yet the Germans had already been delayed more than 3 days. He ordered heavy artillery to intensify their bombardment of the remaining forts, hoping to force them into silence. Meanwhile, engineering units were sent forward to try placing explosives at the base of fortress walls, a lethal mission amid unrelenting Belgian fire. The western forts, Boncel, Hambourg, Liège, soon became the next targets. Big Bertha, having reduced the eastern forts to ruin, was hauled into new firing positions. Every shot was a nightmare. When a nearly 1-ton shell struck the ground, it penetrated meters of reinforced concrete and exploded inside the fort, shaking the entire structure. Walls burst open, steel beams protruded like the bones of a torn creature. Yet even as their forts were being reshaped into mangled ruins, Belgian machine gun and light artillery crews continued firing until no defensible position remained. Inside the city, German troops were forced into brutal urban fighting. Narrow streets and the bridges over the Meuse became killing zones. Belgian defenders formed small resistance pockets, sniping from windows, rooftops, and alleyways. Every building became a makeshift fortress. German forces had to bring up field guns and fire point blank into structures just to suppress the defenders. The civilians of Liège witnessed this horror with overwhelming fear. Big Bertha's detonations were so powerful that windows shattered miles away. Columns of smoke from ruined forts blotted out the sky. Yet despite the terror, many civilians stayed to help, giving water to soldiers, bandaging the wounded, and guiding retreating Belgian units. Their stubborn patriotism made Germany's occupation of the city even harder. On August 8th, the Germans focused their power on Fort Fléron, one of the strongest forts southeast of Liège. After dozens of Big Bertha shells, its armored dome was ripped open and its main guns destroyed. Many Belgian defenders were killed at their posts. Still, machine gun nests inside Fléron continued firing well into the afternoon. Only when the entire roof collapsed did the fort finally fall silent. On the morning of August 9th, General Lehmann left his headquarters to inspect the remaining positions and encourage his troops. But when he neared Fort Lanson, the battle for Liège entered its bloodiest chapter. Big Bertha shifted its fire toward Lancy, the most critical fort because it guarded the center of the defensive ring. The ground trembled under the bombardment. Lancy fought back fiercely, but by afternoon, a shell pierced the roof and detonated inside the fort's main magazine. The resulting explosion became legend. Fort Lanson was nearly blown off the face of the earth. A blazing pillar of fire erupted, followed by a shockwave that echoed throughout the Meuse Valley. Over 350 Belgian soldiers died instantly. General Lehmann was buried under the rubble, unconscious, and later pulled out by German troops. A survivor of an explosion that should have killed everyone, Lancy's destruction had enormous psychological impact. For Germany, it proved that the Liège forts could not withstand Big Bertha. For Belgium, it was a heartbreaking loss, yet also a symbol of unbreakable courage. The garrison had fought to the very last breath. Even as several forts fell, resistance continued. Forts Halone, Lier, and Boncelles kept firing on German troops entering the city. Germany had to commit even more engineers, heavy mortars, and field artillery to neutralize every remaining bunker. By August 10th, Liège was officially in German hands. But contrary to their expectations, the city had not fallen in a single day. It had taken more than a week of brutal combat. And more importantly, the fortress ring did not collapse immediately. Some forts continued firing until August 13th and 14th, forcing Germany to fight longer and harder than Schlieffen's timetable allowed. Liège did not stop Germany from invading Belgium, but it severely slowed the Schlieffen plan. While Germany spent precious days smashing each fort, France and Britain gained invaluable time to mobilize. Belgium paid for that gift of time and blood, with the sacrifices of brave soldiers who held their ground inside forts being crushed hour after hour. After Fort Lanson exploded on the afternoon of August 9, 1914, the Battle of Liège entered its most brutal phase. The blast, heard tens of kilometers away, was like a death knell for Belgium's defensive line. Yet the surviving soldiers in the other forts did not put down their weapons. They knew that every minute they delayed the Germans was one more minute for France and Britain to prepare their armies. They were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting so that their sacrifice would mean something. General Gérard Leman, injured and captured after Lancy's collapse, was brought to the German command almost unconscious. Even so, the Germans treated him with rare respect. He was a commander who had fought to the bitter end despite their overwhelming power. When he finally awoke, he uttered a single sentence that stunned the German officers. "I surrendered only because I was unconscious." And it was true. He had not yielded. He had been knocked down by a shell from Big Bertha. Even with Lancy gone, the fortress ring had not fallen silent. The remaining forts, Holland, Liège, Lantin, Hambourg, Boncelles, continued resisting despite being pushed to the edge of annihilation. For 2 days after the explosion, German heavy artillery kept roaring, sending hundreds of shells crashing down. Each blast cracked the concrete walls and collapsed the armored turrets, yet the Belgian soldiers, wounded, starving, exhausted, held their ground like living monuments in a sea of fire. On the night of August 10th, the German superguns were repositioned to destroy Fort Boncelles, one of the strongest forts south of Liège. Boncelles fired back with its last 150mm rounds, keeping the Germans from advancing. But by midday on August 11th, after a rain of Big Bertha shells, its main dome was smashed open. Shells fell into smaller ammunition stores, triggering secondary explosions. The remaining defenders retreated into the lower galleries, fighting with rifles and machine guns in smoke-filled underground chambers. German engineers approached and demanded their surrender. The fort refused. Only when the concrete walls were blasted apart and no gun could fire did the defenders finally abandon their posts. When German troops entered, they found Belgian soldiers who had died at their stations, rifles still clutched in their hands. To the north of Liège, Fort Liège held out until August 12th. Despite constant bombardment from heavy artillery and high-explosive shells, Liège maintained its fixed guns and inflicted severe losses on German infantry trying to enter the city. At moments, the fort's gunners fired with such precision that the Germans were stunned. Shells crashed directly into assembly areas and shattered attempts to cross the Meuse. But Big Bertha spared no target. When the giant gun turned toward Liège, all hope of the fort's survival vanished. The first hits destroyed its armored turrets. Belgian guns fell silent one by one. The concrete walls were gouged out as if made of clay. Inside the smoke-choked galleries, the Belgian defenders continued firing, fully aware the fort was collapsing around them. By the afternoon of August 12th, Liège finally surrendered. Not because spirit had failed, but because the structure itself could no longer stand after hundreds of devastating impacts. Farther west, Fort Halone reached the point of total desperation. Ammunition was almost gone, water was scarce, and many guns jammed as metal warped from heat and shock. Yet the Belgians kept firing until the Germans blasted their way inside. The survivors were taken prisoner, but remained so defiant that a German officer remarked they had fought like lions. As the forts fell one after another, the situation inside Liège became chaotic. Civilians crowded into basements seeking shelter. German units rotated through newly conquered districts. The streets bore every mark of war: burned houses, shattered masonry, overturned carts, and bodies lying untouched. Belgium had sacrificed the city to slow the enemy, and Liège paid that price in fire, blood, and tears. But the most important fact was no longer which fort stood or which had fallen. It was time. By August 13th, the Germans finally destroyed the remaining forts and announced full control of Liège. But the battle had not lasted 24 hours, as Schlieffen predicted. It had lasted 11 days. And those 11 days were enough for France to complete mobilization under Plan 17, the British Expeditionary Force to land in France, ready for battle, Belgian forces to retreat to Antwerp to reinforce defenses, world opinion to admire Belgium's astonishing courage, Germany's timetable to be disrupted, throwing its entire strategy into disorder. Liège had held off one of Europe's most powerful armies with a ring of steel and a nation that refused to bend. Germany won, but not easily. Their victory was purchased with thousands of casualties, and with strategic damage they would pay for in the battles to come. A German officer later wrote, "Liège showed us that even the most perfect plan can be halted by the will of a people." After Liège, Germany pushed deeper into Belgium toward Brussels, Namur, and finally the French border. But they never regained the speed they had at the start. A small nation had slowed a giant through sheer extraordinary courage. On August 13, 1914, the last forts of Liège finally fell silent. Boncelles was overrun, Liège was completely destroyed, and Halone and Lantine could no longer resist. Germany at last declared full control of Liège after nearly 11 days of fighting, more than 10 times longer than the Schlieffen Plan had originally predicted. But although the city had fallen, the battle left a profound mark on the entire course of World War I, becoming vivid proof that a small nation could halt the advance of a mighty empire. On the very day the guns of Liège went silent, General von Bülow sent a report to Berlin, not to celebrate victory, but to issue a warning. "We have won, but the time we have lost can never be regained." It was a harsh truth. The Schlieffen Plan depended entirely on speed. Every single day was vital. Germany needed to defeat France before Russia completed mobilization, seize Paris before British troops could enter the war, and sweep through Belgium like a storm. But Liège had slowed them down by nearly 2 weeks. And in war, 2 weeks can be the line between a swift victory and a long, bloody stalemate. The strategic consequences became clear immediately. 1. The Allies gained crucial time to mobilize. While Belgian forts were being pounded by Big Bertha's shells, French and British forces raced to prepare. News of the heroic resistance at Liège spread across Europe like a call to arms. The French army, still struggling with the risky, offensively minded Plan 17, now had enough time to identify Germany's true direction of attack. Troops were shifted from Alsace-Lorraine to the north, where the danger was greatest. Military railways worked at maximum speed to move units toward the Sambre and the Marne. Across the English Channel, the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, received orders to deploy to France. Had Liège fallen in 1 or 2 days as Germany expected, the BEF might not have arrived in time, and France might have been defeated before a single British rifle fired on European soil. But thanks to Belgium's stubborn resistance, troop transports landed at Boulogne, Le Havre, and Rouen just in time. By late August, British soldiers were already marching into Belgium, ready to confront the German war machine. Without Liège, the BEF might have been too late to make a difference at Mons, or at the Battle of the Marne. 2. Germany consumed far more forces and resources than planned to break Liège. Germany was forced to deploy. Tens of thousands of elite assault troops, massive engineering units, the Big Bertha and Schumann superguns, field artillery, reserve divisions, and hundreds of tons of ammunition. These forces had been intended for the deep advance into France, yet they were spent at the gateway to Belgium. One German officer wrote, "We had not even reached France, and already our finest units had been bled." The psychological toll was even worse. Many German soldiers, trained for rapid advance, instead found themselves digging, crawling under machine gun fire, and enduring bombardment, conditions they never expected at the start of the campaign. 3. Belgian morale ignited. Becoming a symbol of resistance, Belgium may have lost the battle, but it won the admiration of Europe. Their determination became a rallying cry for the Allies. Newspapers in Britain, France, and the United States hailed the Belgians as heroes, calling them the guardians of Europe's gates of liberty. The small neutral kingdom became a symbol of national self-determination, prompting neutral countries to sympathize with and support the Allied cause. 4. Germany realized small nations' resistance could not be underestimated. What happened at Liège shocked many German generals. They had believed that modern firepower, especially Big Bertha, would crush any fortress in hours. The forts did collapse, but Belgian resolve did not. As one German officer wrote in his diary, "We shattered the concrete, but we could not break their spirit." This forced Germany to reconsider its approach to future battles at Namur, Antwerp, and Maubeuge, where enemy troops, though not always strong, would fight to the last. 5. Liège marked the beginning of civilian massacres in Belgium. A dark consequence of the battle was the violence unleashed on Belgian civilians. Frustrated by the unexpected resistance, Germany accused civilians of sniping and retaliated with mass executions, burning villages, and widespread arrests. Over 6,000 Belgians were killed in the first weeks of occupation. Many towns were razed as punishment. This brutality outraged the international community, further damaging Germany's reputation and strengthening Allied resolve. 6. Liège gave Germany a tactical victory but a strategic defeat. Germany captured the city and destroyed the forts. But the delay was enough to disrupt its entire campaign. Immediately after Liège, Germany faced Belgian forces regrouping at Antwerp, BEF advancing into Belgium, French armies massing along the Marne, Russia mobilizing faster than expected. Many historians argue that the Battle of Liège laid the foundation for Germany's first major strategic failure, the Battle of the Marne, where French and British forces halted the supposedly unstoppable German advance. Liège had fallen, but its echo spread across Europe. Belgian soldiers had done more than defend a city. They kept France from collapsing, enabled Britain to enter the war effectively, and shattered Germany's illusion of a lightning victory. Germany gained a city, but lost the one thing the Schlieffen Plan depended on absolutely: speed. And when speed vanished, the entire German strategy began to collapse, just like the forts they had destroyed. The 1914 Battle of Liège closed like a heroic and tragic overture to the storm of World War I. Though merely a small nation, Belgium stood firm beneath the iron heel of the German Empire, turning Liège into a symbol of courage and the unbreakable will to be free. Its fierce resistance not only slowed the advance of the Schlieffen Plan, but also helped shift the balance of power across Europe, giving France and Britain the precious time they needed to assemble their armies and setting the stage for the decisive battles that would follow. How do you feel about the sacrifices made by the Belgian soldiers and civilians in those fiery opening days of 1914? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more epic historical battles brought to life with unmatched intensity and realism.